Welcome and good day to our viewers from across the country. My name is Mark McKelsey. I'm the Director of Insights and Communications at Global Market Development Center. GMDC Infocasts, like the one that you're watching now, makes your lunch hour profitable by delivering up-to-the-minute actionable insights for your business and keeps you relevant for today's evolving marketplace. And it couldn't be more relevant than today's topics. Before we do that, I'd like to introduce Nancy Giordano really quickly because we're coming to you live from Colorado and have Nancy from Play Big Inc. joining us from Austin, Texas. Nancy is also one of our newest board members joining the GMDC Council for 2017 and 18. So the infocast that we're bringing you is about how to navigate the never-ending big shift that we see taking place in today's world, industry, and most importantly at retail. We can see and feel that society is transforming, especially lately. It feels more like a dog-eat-dog world than ever before. While we have Amazon, the biggest e-com player trying to push into brick and mortar, we also have the largest retailer on the planet trying to push into e-com space. So what's going on? There are no boundaries anymore in regards to putting a product or solution in front of a consumer. Everybody is changing lanes in an effort to grow in a flat market. What is driving all this disruption and rule bending? Sellers and manufacturers today don't really have any rules anymore. Exponential advances in connectivity and technology, precarious economics, new and highly provocative political and social structures that go against the grain, and even an emerging desire for community, especially by millennials, are causing old models to become quickly obsolete. We intend to help answer some of those questions today for both retailers and their partners, on especially what it takes to navigate such a complex environment. So first of all, it takes new ways of thinking fueled by a desire to rethink previous models in a fresh way and almost every day. We see successful companies who adopt innovation deep inside their organizations, winning and sometimes disrupting even themselves, in a good way, of course. So before we get started and dive in, I'd like to remind you, all of our viewers, that we'll take questions after the session or during, and you can use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to those at the end. So let's get started. Back over to you, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate being here. It is a beautiful day in Austin, although it's probably 99 degrees on its way to 100. So I was just sort of dive in. There's a lot to cover when we start thinking about the future. You know, we're going to cover the big cultural shifts and some of the big technological disruptions or the sort of the emergent possibilities, but there's a lot in talking about them. So what does this mean and what do we do? So we'll try and cover as much of that as we can, and we'll sort of see how it goes. So the way that there's a quote that most futurists use when they give these talks, and it's been around for a while, from William Gibson, about the future already exists, it just isn't evenly distributed. That assumes that there's a killer app somewhere that if we could just figure out what it is, then we can wait long enough, we could adopt it, and we could grow. And unfortunately, that isn't the way it works anymore. I think it's much more real time. And so there's this real question as you look at the road ahead, like, how do you prepare for something that is literally forming and being created in real time? And that's really what the challenge is around navigating. So the way that we try and help our clients think through this, or GMDC, the people we get to partner with, are answering these two questions. Do you have an understanding of what the future needs and expects from you? And do you understand you're in a unique position then to create and contribute to that future because of your equities and histories and unique attributes? So it's really about trying to marry those two things, is about how we talk about navigating. So hopefully today we're going to cover where we are now, where we're headed, what this means, and how we're going to get there. We'll see how far we get into that conversation in the next 40-something minutes. But the hope is to give you guys a lay of the land. And as you look through it, I really encourage listeners to think about it through three lenses, right? One is, yes, as an industry professional who's trying to figure out how to, ensure that your job and your organization and your industry stays relevant. But you're also a human in the midst of us, right? So as a parent, as an uncle, as a community member, a neighbor, anywhere, you are also taking in the same exact shifts are impacting you as a human, and you're a member of society. And these things do have implications on society. So I would encourage us to, again, open our aperture, not just in thinking about this organizationally, but thinking about this humanistically. And that is a theme, I think, that will be carried through. Because at the end of the day, here we are as humans trying to navigate something that is, changing as fast as technology is, growing as quickly as information is, and shifting as fast as culture is. And it's happening exponentially. If you follow any work from a guy named Peter Diamandis or Ray Kurzweil or the Singularity Institute, it's all about the fact that as humans, we're wired for linear change, but find it very discomforting to have exponential change, right? Exponential comes at rates that are really difficult to kind of stay hardwired to. So it's part of what is unsettling. It's also part of what makes it exciting and why you can have quote unquote unicorn companies come out of nowhere. But it's a recognition that, we aren't necessarily wired for the environment that we're in. And it starts to show up a bit like this, right? As consumers and members of society, we're demanding more. And the list includes things like better quality, more innovation, greater transparency, personalization, speed, on and on and on, right? That list we could probably add 3 or 4 more demands to it that people have. And yet, this is what they're willing to give us for it, right? Less time, they want less energy, less money, less complexity, less loyalty. So as you imagine the tension between these things, right? A greater demand to meet my needs, and yet I'm willing to give you less potentially for that. It puts us in a squeeze of how do we possibly navigate and manage this, and how do we shift business models to make this possible? What is the role that technology plays in both sides of that? So another way to think about it is that we are in the midst of a shift from one economic era to another. There's a futurist named Mary O'Hara Devereux who talks about this in a book. In most of her work, she thinks very far out. She looks, out into the horizon quite far. Apparently, has been studying this since the Middle Ages. And every 75 years or so, there's a shift from one economic era to another, and everyone tries to label what those shifts are. Regardless of what the label is, the fact is it's a time in which old systems are breaking down and new ones have yet to be created. And you've got this little gulf in between where you're trying to jump from one side to the other. And in the era that we're in now, even when you make it to the other side, it's not necessarily guaranteed that you're home free, right? It's still shifting and changing. So the fact is, it's affecting every industry, every organization, every person. No one has escaped the space that we're in right now. And when you start to see things like Uber and Facebook and Alibaba and Airbnb and Spotify and Tinder, and the list goes on, right? These are companies that have created giant valuations and huge disruptions, and they don't own anything, right? They don't own any inventory. They don't own any brick and mortar spaces, right? They have just become digital matchmakers between a desire and, the way that desire gets fulfilled, which is extraordinary and scary and overwhelming when you imagine that that's what's possible now. So when you look at a future like this, you have a choice, right? You can be really pessimistic about it or optimistic about it. Pessimists or pessimistic thoughts that come through are about the need to constantly learn, to be afraid of failing, to feel like there's so much coming at you and feel overwhelmed, to feeling isolated from it, like you don't necessarily know what's going on. You don't feel really, really connected to what's happening. But on the other side of it, the people who are really excited about this moment in time think about the fact that we've got more collaborative structures. The playing field has become much more democratic. The barriers to entry are really low. There's tons of opportunity to meet people's needs. Culture is shifting in a way in which it's presenting new needs. So there's a lot of upside to what's happening. And if you talk to a bunch of futurists, actually, we get very excited about a future in which you look at very big shifts around the cost of energy, food production, and a lot of other things. And over time, our standard of living has only gotten better. Poverty is lower, mortality is lower, even violence is lower, even though the news doesn't make it sound like that. So we're moving in a tremendous trajectory. It's just there's a lot that we have to kind of digest between here and there. So the good news is, there's bad news, right? There are companies that have not made it through this gauntlet, through this shift, are stuck in it, can't quite figure out how to get to the other side. But there are plenty of also companies that have made it through and are continuing to innovate and are continuing to grow and are continuing to meet needs in a really relevant way. So we step back and sort of study, how they do that and what does it take to be successful in this environment. So another way to think about this when you think about the future is if you look at a photo or a snapshot like this, some of you might see an image, some of you might not. Those of you who see an image are likely to see a giraffe. And the reason that you can see a giraffe is not because there's a literal picture of a giraffe in there. It's because you understand the properties of giraffiness, right? Giraffes have certain kinds of shaped ears and a certain kind of snout and a certain kind of coloring. And you can pick out that there's a giraffe in this piece of art. That's basically what it looks like when we talk about the future, right? There isn't a prescription. There isn't, again, the killer app. There isn't a clear roadmap. But if you start to appreciate the attributes of futuriness, right? What are the things that are happening that we can start to point to and start to say, oh, there's an opportunity, or oh, there's a threat? we can actually be better prepared for it. So that's the work that I like to do. Just to step back for a second and talk a little bit about where I come from, there are certain things that credential me in being able to bring you guys this story. The first is that we have done consulting work with a broad range of companies, starting in the left with ones that are very conservative when trying to figure out, their way many years ago, like the Tournament of Roses or Del Monte or the largest baking company in the world, like Dawn, continuing to some of the largest food companies, largest telecommunication companies, largest beverage companies, large banking companies, right? On to now, more recently, where I work with an artificial intelligence startup, and I'm working now with a fintech bank or fintech company that's trying to work to keep community banks alive. So we're really seeing this not just as theorists, but as practitioners inside organizations trying to figure out how to stay relevant. But it's not just about the fact that we do this alone, right? In this world of work that we're in now, we need to build networks of people who can help us understand what's going on and be pulled in. None of us will know enough, right? It's about building collaborative systems. So we have a network that we call Pinkers, people you need to know. If you go to the website, you'll find a whole list of all these amazing people. These are literally architects of the future. These are not people who are, sort of middlemen to it. These are people who are building it. And I get to have a whole range of them that I get to draw from. So this work feels very tangible to me and very real to me. It doesn't feel ephemeral. I've also built events, whether it's TEDx Austin or a conference called GigaOM Change, which is all about the disruptive technologies that are changing business. So when you get to go again and meet the people who are designing and creating the future, it starts to form this in a very solid way. And I'll also just point out that on the far end of it, this past spring, I moderated a discussion at South by Southwest on the future of intelligence with 3 people who are building outrageous futures, right? One of the founders of Siri, who's now creating another artificial intelligence assistant platform called Viv, a person who wants to put a prosthesis in our brains so we'll be able to read and write our brains and be able to keep up with machines, called Kernel, and a woman who's built a company that they describe as a gene foundry, where we're literally going to be terraforming and building our future. We're growing our futures instead of manufacturing our futures. So when you talk to these people who are building, companies and putting tremendous amount of energy against something that is so outrageous, it starts to, again, say that where we are right now is a unique moment in time. So as Mark Twain invited us, you can't trust your judgment if your imagination's out of focus. So I will take you on a ride for a few minutes to help expand your imagination. It is for good use. We spent a lot of time decoding the future because of these projects, and we built a model. And this is the shape of the model. It used to be 9 shifts, and we talked about 10 shifts. But these are the sort of the biggies. Most of these should be familiar to people. We've been talking about these for 5 or 6 years, certainly post-recession. But there are 4 that I want to pay attention to quickly here, because if we don't even understand these, then we have no shot at being able to understand what's possible. All right. The first is around this idea of a bipolar economy. So here are just a couple of fascinating stats. If you looked at wealth distribution in the United States, it would look like this. Roughly a third of the people own 1% of the wealth of the country, around 33%, or 32, I think you just said, right? The top 10% of the population owns 75 or 90, I think 75% of the wealth. So if you imagine, again, how that is hollowing out the potential of the middle class. We used to believe that there was an accessible and growing middle class, and most of our products were pitched at that. Most of our retail experiences were pitched at that. And the fact is now you've got this giant polarization of extraordinary wealth on one end and, growing, I wouldn't necessarily say poverty, although there is a concern around that there is actually American poverty, but certainly not as much discretionary income, and people being much more thoughtful about how they want to live. It starts to manifest in crazy things like that. So here's a $62 million tree house that you could buy. It was on the Robb Report. That is a 20,000 square foot tree house. It has, zip lines and a pool and some sort of water operated elevator. The crazy thing is, who would necessarily buy that? But when you look at the stats, there are now 2016 roughly billionaires in the world. That's up 13% from last year. Their wealth is estimated at $7.7 trillion, which is up 18%. So not only do we have more, but they're growing faster, right? And people start doing crazy calculations like what number of people control half the world's wealth? It used to be 388 people controlled half the world's wealth. And then it went down to 62. And now we think it might be as close to, by 2020, maybe 35 people will control as much wealth as like half the population on the planet. So you start to see more and more concentration, which is really disruptive, right? And I would argue not a great thing. On the other end of it, then you see people getting really crafty and really thoughtful. whether they are forced to be or whether they just want voluntary simplicity and want to have, a sort of an easier way of living. So you see people building things like this, which is a totally modular, beautifully designed home with some friends here in Austin called Casitas that are only 225 square feet. They're built almost like containers, and you can buy one, own it, and then when you want to move from one city to another, it literally can be transported and moved to another city. It is built with very sophisticated industrial design. Now you imagine if you live in this, what that does for your shopping, right? You don't get to take big Costco trips and stock them up in your extra fridge like I do. It changes your whole relationship with how you own and how much you own and how much you consume and where you consume it. So these are the kinds of things. The tiny homes movement is real. This move to kind of, making our lives smaller and simpler is real. So you've got this kind of, again, polarized desire for goods and services, I suppose. One thing that every presentation I use now really needs to introduce, because most people are not aware of it yet, is a concept of universal basic income. There are a lot of questions about how do we redistribute wealth in a way that is more fair as productivity continues to go up, and we'll talk more about how technology is driving that. How do we redistribute wealth? So there's this thought that we would have some sort of basic income that would be given to every citizen. It is not based on like Medicare or SNAP. It is something that would be given to everyone. It is distributed with much less bureaucracy. It interestingly has support on both conservative and progressive, Republican and Democrat side. It has not been politicized yet. There's a lot of controversy around it, but in the last 2 years, it's become a very, very big conversation. And again, it's not just theoretical. Our friends in Hawaii have decided to be the first state to pass a bill in support of universal basic income. And this was a tweet from one of their legislators that feels as though everyone deserves to have basic financial security. So again, it's just an interesting thing to imagine this whole relationship that we have with money and discretionary income, and how do we spend it and where does it go, right? We start to imagine a future in which we might all have some level of, a secure income, which allows us then to hopefully do some other things with our lives. Okay, that was just the first shift. That was one. Another is obviously the technology shifts that are happening and the emergence of how quickly things shift. So if you think in 2004, we didn't even have Facebook and YouTube. I think it was right around the time that those two things were born. The iPhone has been around now 10 years. I think the anniversary was last week. So the iPhone, the tablet, the Square, right? All the things that sort of have shifted so much about how we get information and how we're able to control our lives, which then bred this entire universe of giant app-based companies that are worth billions of dollars now that somehow totally, again, shift how we connect with one another, how we find information, how we gather goods and services in our lives. So as you look at that landscape over just a few short years, it's not crazy to suddenly then imagine that these other technologies are also going to come in and have really disruptive impact. This is from a Price Waterhouse study that showed that the 8 essential technologies are everything, again, from robots and drones to 3D printing, blockchain, AI, virtual reality, augmented reality, the Internet of Things. We built a conference a year or so ago that was basically on those same technologies. We brought in experts around AI, robotics, 3D printing, nano. We also talked about cryptocurrencies, human-machine interface. Like, these are real and they're happening now. And you see them show up in places like massive robots that are keeping the docks flowing in a more efficient way in Los Angeles, or a startup that's a combination or a joint venture between San Francisco folks and folks in Russia that 3D printed a house in 24 hours. And it's not an unstable house. It's designed to last for 175 years, and it costs $10,332 to build, right? Now, the fact that that is happening is mind-blowing. Now, is it happening at scale yet? Is it our neighborhoods being built this way yet? No, but the fact that it is now, encroaching. So you start to imagine then what those trajectories look like and how do we prepare for a future that's shifting that way. This was actually from a patent application that was just filed a week or two ago from Amazon. And when they started to imagine that we will have these drone beehives in metro areas. So the idea is to replace warehouses that are far out of town usually, and be able to have something that's more convenient in metro areas. People would be working in these towers and being able to, you can see the scale, the little person down below. These things are big, right? So someone's now working in a tower, feeding the drones so they can go make their deliveries immediately. Now, whether or not it will look exactly like that, they have various models of what it could look like and whether or not it will even get built. The fact that Amazon is thinking about this and filing patents for this means that this is not science fiction, right? It is potentially what our commerce world will look like. And it's also going to be fed by this whole layer of artificial intelligence. So we've talked about Alexa and Google Home, and now Apple's got theirs. But interestingly, Alexa or Amazon has partnered with Mattel to create one that's for kids. So it's called Aristotle, and not only does it have the voice, but it also has a camera. And it starts very innocuously with an infant that's crying, and you can program how you want that infant to be comforted, whether it's stars on the ceiling, or whether it's Bach or Billy Joel, or how many seconds the music should start or stop, which sounds great. But then the kid starts, this is part of the kid's life, and they start playing with this, and they start asking whether or not their American Girl doll would like to have tea, and the AI answers on behalf of the doll. Right? Or you're paying your Thomas the Train train, and all of a sudden you get the sound effects of the train, or going through the city, or stopping at a crowded bus, a train depot. So it'll be really interesting to see how kids really find this to be second nature in their lives and lean on these technologies in the way that we have it. So we used to talk about digital natives because of our phones are not. Imagine digital natives that have AI embedded in them from when they were babies. Kind of crazy. Which brings me then to another area that I think is really important that we talked about, which is thriving and thrivability, right? How do we make sure that we take good care of ourselves and each other? Not surprisingly, as all these other shifts are happening, we also are facing a really interesting social crisis, which is loneliness. I would call it the fastest growing social epidemic. It's estimated that social isolation is nearly as potent as smoking 15 cigarettes a day for early death. Twice as deadly as obesity. Now, again, why is this happening? And I haven't really talked a lot about the social structures, but so many of these things are breaking down, right? A third, I think, of people are now working freelance that used to work in companies. So that social structure has shifted. It's awesome. You get to have a lot more flexibility. I don't work in a corporate office. I get to work in my client's office today, but I won't be here tomorrow. But it does mean that you don't have that same, connection to a corporate environment, or to the training that's available, or to ways of marking your success. We know that religion is shifting and changing. We know education is shifting and changing. The expectations to necessarily go to a four-year college are shifting. We don't have training programs inside organizations as well. So there's a lot that is, and people are moving further away. We've got increases in single-family homes, whether it's single parents or aging adults. We have people who are waiting longer and longer to get married. So for whatever it is, we've got this giant single population who is unmoored from a lot of traditional institutions, which is leading to things like this, right? When we start talking about the need for community, and the need to connect, and the need to have experiences, this is a big part of why. We want to still feel human in a digital world. Which is why you see things people aggregate now, right? So people who are free agents, if you will, who are solopreneurs, go to places like WeWork, and there's lots and lots of co-working spaces. WeWork has just seemed to really unlock a scalable model that makes people feel really good about being there. When we had our artificial intelligence startup, we worked out of a WeWork office here in Austin. And it's not just the space and how it feels, it's also the community, right? And the connections to other people, and the fact that you're connected to a whole range of resources all over the country and increasingly all over the world. So WeWork is a really great symbol for how people are finding each other in a more disconnected world. And interestingly, they're now playing with We Live, which is a community in which you would live, literally, like dorm style. Not necessarily with other entrepreneurs, although it could be. They have them, I think, now in New York and Washington and potentially some other cities. But it's a whole different way of living, in which there's a certain amount of private time that you have, and there's a certain amount of social time that you have. So you eat meals more with others, and you might be working out in the open with others. So you don't feel so isolated in this world. Interestingly, though, it can also show up in more mundane ways. We work with a giant restaurant company. We begged them to try and do something like this, and they thought it was kind of crazy or sort of ahead of its time. And now you see Olive Garden doing it, which is a family table, right? They invite you to come and sit with others that you don't know, make some new friends, try new recipes. It's a great way to involve millennials and make them feel that sense of discovery and that sense of connection, right? And what they recognize is that casual dining has this wonderful opportunity, back to being in a unique position to create and contribute to the future, of pulling people together, right? Creating community, creating new connections, being a place that really solves a bit of that isolation problem. So I love this example of what Olive Garden is doing. Another way to do it, I mean, it's interesting to look at when we talk about this migration in retail of brick and mortar, or online or online. Warby Parker started off as an online retailer, not just online, also with a tremendous value proposition, right? Then decided to go into brick and mortar, and now is building their stores to be highly experiential and to be very Instagrammable. So what they see is in social media, right? Someone putting on a pair of Warby Parker glasses, figures out a really cool environment to take that photo in, and how engaged everybody else gets. And not just the glasses, but the whole story and the craftsmanship of that photo. And so now in their West Hollywood store, they've created a whole green screen room where you can go in and you can, put whatever environment you want around you. You can even put a green blanket so your head is floating, presumably wearing glasses and snapping it from there. In their Miami one, it looks more like you're inside a big pool. In Portland, you're in an arcade. There's the Do Good arcade, and all the money goes to philanthropic causes. So they're really trying for each locality to bring something that is unique that people want to Instagram to others, right? They want to share with others. They recognize we have a social brain. How does retail become part of the experience? It pulls us together and makes us feel more interesting and more human. And finally, we've got this idea that it's all connected. I don't know that we've really fully appreciated it before. I think historically we've tried to build things inside. We built organizations that are siloed. We built teams that are siloed. We don't recognize some of our actions have repercussions or ripple effects, and think about the externalities. And inside, we often are looking for really solutions that are, I would call, interventions, as opposed to a systemic way of looking at something and understanding how all the parts connect and how you can drive much bigger change. It's one of the biggest successes we've had with Nestle, was thinking about this not just in terms of an intervention, how to get people to buy more frozen food, but to answer the question about how do we rebuild trust in industrial food, right? We looked at it from across every bit of their business, from how they disseminate information to how they name things on the campus to how they package and price things and buy things, and the whole way in which they looked at their business. There's a quote from a professor at MIT that I love, which is that leadership is about being able to see, leadership is about being better able to listen to the whole than anyone else can, right? When you can step back and see the whole and understand how some of these shifts are all connected to one another, you end up creating things like Amazon Go, right? Amazon Go is not just a retail solution. It is about, they use artificial intelligence, they're using machine learning, they're thinking a lot about cultural lifestyles, they're thinking about where people live, they're thinking about how this, connects to their entertainment products. I mean, whatever it is, Amazon to me is a very holistic thinker that thinks about the cloud, that thinks about Prime, that thinks about the, online programming, and thinks about being able to have a store in which you can just swipe your phone and walk back. And holistically, it creates what seem like, transformative opportunities, but are very obvious when you can see them from that perspective. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so if we accept that those are some of the shifts, and I haven't even gone to sort of detail on all of them, on the Internet of Everything and social brain, and sort of this moment of being constantly in the now and feeling that things are changing so fast. The question is, what does this mean for us as business leaders? I go back to, again, now that we understand what the future needs and expects, how do we uniquely contribute and create toward it? So here's an interesting quote that kind of puts it in perspective. This is from David Brooks, the conservative columnist from the New York Times. The majority of companies and their employees and their leaders are navigating a space where competitors appear overnight, customers demand innovation monthly, business plans rarely last a year, and career ladders have been replaced by trampolines. This environment of constant change only accelerates in the future, and traditional business leaders are ill-equipped to deal with it. So that's the thing that scares me, right? It's not that the future isn't full of opportunities, that we aren't aware of it yet, and we aren't building enough either models or scaffolding to it that can take advantage of it and hold some of what needs to be held. And the word that I think is operative in what he wrote is navigate. We're used to being people who learn to produce success in a certain way, and we're able to replicate that success and scale that success, right? It's how Coca-Cola was built. It's how Nestle was built. It's how Chili's was built. All those companies figured out a formula. They figured out how to make it really consistent. They figured out how to replicate it. They figured out how to scale it. And we're now not in that world. We don't get to be replicators anymore, building things at scale. We are navigators who have to innovate our way forward. Being an innovator and a navigator requires a really different set of skills. But before you can change your strategy, you have to change the way you think, right? This isn't about like operationalizing like a new pattern that you can, again, scale, right? It is about thinking about your whole work and the way that you approach things in a really different way. So one, I would argue, is that we think about the shift, again, not in terms of this era and that era, but in terms of what we were trying to do in one and what we get to do now in the next. So we were moving away from an era of value extraction, right? How much can we extract in terms of dollar value, attention, resources, whatever it is? Like, how can I hold it? How can I extract as much value from it? And often, how do I give that mostly to my shareholders, right? There isn't necessarily a more systemic, more connected way of thinking about that. When you're only worried about ROI, it really stunts growth. It works really well in the predictive replication scale world. It is a lousy model for being able to move through a navigation innovation world. There's a lot of books that have been written about this. There was a great blog article that was just written about why Silicon Valley even is sort of strangling itself by learning so much about the valuation and not enough about what really drove innovation in Silicon Valley was about value creation, about contributing to people's lives, having a big transformative purpose, as they say at Singularity, but really being driven to be able to add and increase people's lives, add value to people's lives. And think about that across all the stakeholders, not just the shareholders. How does everyone benefit from what it is that we're doing? How do we think about the life cycle of our products from inception and sourcing all the way through when the product, maybe at the end of its lifespan for me, but maybe some, a renewed lifespan for somebody else. You see increasingly, clothing companies being part of the circular economy and bringing their goods and services to others. So it's about thinking about this from another place. And when you're able to think about it from that value creation side, it drives a hunger for innovation. It drives, it feeds an appetite for risk a little bit, right? You're able to take on stuff and not be so afraid of it because you're being driven by something bigger. You have a why that drives you, not just a what. Oops, my slide's a little wonky. But so what does this mean again for retail? There are some examples. I won't go into tons of them, but I think it's interesting when you start to imagine, how this all starts to form together. The first is this is, a sort of an ugly looking slide, but it was just a tweet taken from someone that talks about the fact that Amazon's market cap is equal to Walmart, Target, Best Buy, Kohl's, Macy's, and Misspelled, Nordstrom, JCPenney, and Sears, right? Like it is greater than all those stores put together. So you're really putting it in context of how large Amazon is. Mark, I think when we went to Google's headquarters and got to talk to them, I forgot the stat. Was it that 51 cents of every online dollar goes to Amazon, right? I mean, that's a significant market share. And as we see, we're not in any way slowing down on that. So the real question that is posed is how can a brick and mortar store obtain the competency and talent necessary to become something they aren't and almost immediately compete at a really high level? This is from an article in Forbes that talked about the digital transformation. And the fact is, it's not just that a brick and mortar retailer needs to become a digital retailer, it's that people's expectations have been set by Amazon for how that digital experience should go, right? How quickly it should be fulfilled, how quickly I should be able to return things, how I've presented various products and so, that I can buy because you understand me, you've done whatever the algorithm says that I would really care and want. Interestingly, I'm giving a talk in a few weeks to eBay sellers, since I've been talking to eBay sellers about their work and their world. And this whole idea about free returns, right? Amazon has set that up now as the fact that I should be able to get a free return, which means that every eBay seller is trying to figure out whether or not they can meet that expectation. So it's got these big ripple effects. So now you imagine that you're going to have this in-home technology, whether again it's Alexa or another voice-based thing, in which I have automatic lists. I have, credit cards already in, various forms at various stores. I can have things delivered immediately. Anyone who lives near an Amazon distribution center will talk about the magic of having something delivered within 2 to 4 hours, right? You're out of pens at the office, all of a sudden they're there. You're out of diapers, all of a sudden they're there. It's just amazing how, again, expectations keep getting recalibrated and how challenging that is, again, for people who haven't played in that space at all. And then you start to add on the new technologies, right? So what role will virtual reality or augmented reality play? This is something that happens at Alibaba. There's a Singles Day, a National Singles Day in China, which is a big holiday. I think it's like 1111 or something, or 1111. And they did a big, virtual reality shopping experience as a result, just to sort of start playing with this. Now, how quickly those technologies will come aboard, we don't know. But augmented reality, which is a whole layer of information over my physical world, I think it's going to happen really quickly, and it's going to add a whole level of choice or discrimination around what it is that I buy or information that I'm looking for, right? But I start to care more about things like how something was sourced and the transparency of the supply chain and how people were sort of treated along that. There's a lot of talk right now about things like labor slavery and environmental resources. So technologies like this will not just be for entertainment; they can also be about making more conscious choices. And they've got things like, a virtual makeup mirror, which was kind of cool when that first came out, which is that I can sort of see immediately how that makeup's going to look on me without having to put it all on. But then you move into a future in which you've got things like 3D printing, right? So it's not even like I'm just playing around with makeup. It's the fact that I can create my own makeup. And then you have whole new players that enter categories. So now suddenly Panasonic is in the makeup business, competing against L'Oreal and competing against, Maybelline and whoever else is in there. So right now what they've created, and just quickly, this is a machine that actually, if you've got some sort of skin discoloration, you can go in, they do a mapping of your face, they figure out how to create a little patch, and you put the patch on your skin, and it basically matches your face. And somehow that scar or that rash or that discoloration goes away for whatever period of time, right? So this is a very discreet product, and you can write it off as irrelevant. But the fact is, at some point, we could be printing a whole range of products that are personalized and perfect just for me, right? And again, new competitors are coming in to be part of this. And then you've got the whole world of 3D printing, right? What does 3D printing look like in different categories? Here in the world of vitamins, we've got a big accelerator named Y Combinator, who's invested in something called Multiply Labs, which is using 3D printing to personalize supplements. And this is a supplement that's got exactly what it is that I need. It's time released so that it comes into my body at whatever rate it's supposed to, and it's just for me. It's like personalized for me, which again is the sort of the holy grail of medicine and well-being and caregiving. But the fact that it could be, where do I pick these things up? Do I pick them up at my CVS? Do I have them delivered to me by drone? Do I print them out of my own 3D printer in my home? I mean, who knows, right? At Giga Change, we had the president of global distribution from UPS on the stage with the CTO from HP discussing a 3D and even 4D printed world in which we have all kinds of technology embedded in things that they can get printed. And they literally did a video that showed that we might not have a future with warehouses anymore, right? And why is UPS building a whole network, what they call fast radius for 3D printing? Because they know that their business will be disrupted by drones, by various technologies, by a whole range of things. They're trying to figure out how they start to invest in the future. And then you compare that to sort of what's happening in, sort of the brick and mortar world. So these are just sort of recent headlines, right? What was so funny is to see the headline from a few months ago that said Amazon was working on several grocery store formats. It could open 2,000 locations. We should have known that Whole Foods was on their radar, right? Amazon was doing this at the same time that Whole Foods was really trying to figure out their growth strategy and was having all kinds of, margin pressure and trying to figure out how to appeal more to cost-conscious millennials. And all of a sudden, boom, a marriage that seemed to catch us all off guard, but probably shouldn't have, and particularly here in Austin, it's rattled us a bit. And then you see people like even Walmart investing in technologies inside their stores, which people will be more interactive. They'll be able to use these things. So again, it's not just challenger players. It is current, market leaders that are also trying to figure out how to deal with this kind of thing. And yet here's the reality, right? You've got all kinds of stuff happening here that seems really on the cutting edge. And we then, even as retailers, haven't figured out the most basic technology, which is how do we capture email addresses so I can start to build a relationship with my shoppers, right? I have a great relationship with Nordstrom. Nordstrom somehow knows me really well. I get emails every few days. It seems perfectly curated to just the stuff that I might need. I can flip through it in seconds. And if I decide to buy something, it's one click and I'm in. I'm done. I don't have to go to the store. I don't have to go online. They've just figured out a way to somehow be really, really relevant to me. And I've given permission for them to do that because I trust them, right? If we do not have a way of being able to even capture email addresses in some way, that is, again, a whole opportunity lost, a whole bunch of data that is lost that Amazon's got about how I shop. And, my local grocery store doesn't. So I just find that kind of fascinating. The gap, again, continues to grow. We've got to get more creators and we've got to jump more in, which goes back then to, okay, if you've got cultural shifts on one end and technology shifts on the other end, both squeezing, what happens to leadership? How do we show up in a way in which we, can present more courageous and more transformative choices and options and solutions? So I will give you now my case for audacious leadering. And I use the word leadering. It's not my word. It came from a friend of mine, Peter, who is disrupting the financial and banking industry. But leadering is more an active verb, right? It's not a place that you have ascended to. It is something that you are doing every day, and everyone has capacity for and agency for, not just people at a certain title. But you see things like this floating through the world of business. So this came from some work that we had done with a big Fortune 100 company. There was an email that was written by one of the senior leaders in the emerging markets group that was writing to his direct reports, which were all very senior, been part of the company for 10 or 15 years, and was really imploring them to look at the future with less a prescriptive outlook, right? He said many of the things that we are driving are pioneering. There is no blueprint. We are the architects and we are the builders. This is hard work, right? He asked them to get out of swim lanes that completely define what each person did and didn't want to work collaboratively with one another. And he just went on and on about how important it was to do this. Now, interestingly, if I showed you a picture inside of what that office looked like, it could not be more generic 8-foot gray cubes. that were labeled B192 and C197. There's devoid of humanity, devoid of collaboration, devoid of anything that feels sort of part of this emergent future. So you've got this often disconnect between what we're asking people to do and the infrastructure or the incentives or the environments that we create to make that possible. So if we have a moment at the end, I'll talk some about hurdles to change, because I think that's one of the biggies. But the fact is, it is asking us to play bigger, right? It's asking us to play with more courage. It's asking us to take on a bigger role. 17 is an interesting number. It's the number of years apparently they found in the world of social work that it takes from when there's something that is highly, innovative in the field of social work and has been, verified and validated successfully, to get all the way through the field of social workers. So if you imagine, again, this is like some of the most, important work, right? It holds us as a society, as families, as people in need. And to think that you're working with, a practice that is 12 years out of date or 15 years out of date. The fact is that happens in business all the time. We just don't get 17 years, right? We always go through the bloodbath of all the companies that didn't make it through that gauntlet because they had the opportunities presented to them. They saw the technologies, they saw the writing on the wall, and they didn't go for it fast enough. Kia lost $1 billion or more of shareholder value because it just didn't jump on the same technology that Apple had. Qualcomm presented it to both of them. One company did it, one company didn't. Barnes & Noble is still around, Borders is not around, right? So what does it take to be the company that is able to make it through and have the courage to disrupt oneself? Now, part of it's moving out of this mindset. I love this cartoon because it's so true, right? If it were a really good idea, someone else would already be doing it, and we would follow late to market with an undifferentiated knockoff, right? That has been the safety strategy. Wait till it gets to a certain level of mass and we can jump in. The fact is, again, Jet.com came out of nowhere, right? Walmart had to buy them for a significant amount of money. So it wasn't that they was waiting to knock them off. It's like they were about to knock off, Walmart. And part of it has to do with how we have built our structures. When I went into the artificial intelligence startup, we talked a lot about how do we build a company of the future and how do those structures and hierarchies shift and change. We looked at a lot of models for how companies are run and what problems they're trying to solve for. This is an article from the Wall Street Journal from 2010, right? So this wasn't just last week, but we've been, again, getting this message now for many, many years that corporate bureaucracy is becoming obsolete. We need to think more like venture capitalists. We need to be able to place bets in different ways. And that in some ways, the structures that we have are designed to protect exactly against any kind of threat of new, right? It's all about trying to protect a consistent thing that can be replicated. So how do we build things that are more emergent, right? Here's the way that I have described it to various clients that we work with and that we try and move past this stuff with. Old economy expectations were things like this: stability, certainty, mastery, control, autonomy, incremental improvement, right? God forbid we did anything that was really disruptive or big. We had closed systems, we had rules, we had corporate manuals, we had all kinds of things that tried to enforce that people do things in a certain way so that we, again, could reliably create transactions that people could, count on, right? It was about a transactive model delivered in a reliable, consistent way. And as we know, we probably put together a really different list of what the new economy is expecting, right? We expect companies to be responsive, to be dynamic, to be adaptive, to be distributed, not controlled, to be collaborative, not autonomous, not to create incremental, but to really create audacious solutions to things, to really anticipate what I might need and bring a solution that I never thought of before. I mean, that's what the iPhone did, right? We didn't know that we wanted this thing, and all of a sudden it happened and changed everything about how we live our lives. We don't want systems to be closed. We want them to be open and possible transparent. And we don't want you to have rules. We want you to have beliefs and values, right? That's what we're drawn to. And that's whether it's as a consumer or as it's an employee or as a partner or in any way that somebody wants to invest in the ecosystem that you're creating. It is an ecosystem, and I want to understand why it matters and how I play a part in it, so that I can build something that is both transformative and trustworthy. Trust is a giant word as we move into this future, in which we're going to have more data about people, and we're going to have more ways in which we're going to be able to reach them. We've got all kinds of things that we can figure out. I will migrate toward and want to do business with the companies I trust, not just against a cyber security threat, but that also hold me well. They don't stalk me with the information, they serve me with the information, right? So this is kind of the world that we're in, which then sets up all kinds of expectations for how do we show up as leaderingers, right? We ask people to be nimble, creative, curious, resourceful, humble, vulnerable, authentic, to be driven by this big purpose and this big why, to really be committed, right? To be committed to this mission. If you talk to people at Amazon, man, I'm sure that they are very committed. It's a tough place to work, but they really feel as though they've got an idea, they can execute it, they get it out there, they transform things. There's something very satisfying, right, about that. The question is, have we built cultures, again, that allow that to happen? And you don't need to read this whole quote, but the fact is, culture, not vision or strategy, is the most powerful factor in any organization. Peter Drucker always said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. The companies that have built cultures that allow for adaptation, allow for growth, are the ones that are able to take on some of this stuff. So I won't go through these with big, things, but just to know that this is real world, right? Marriott is preparing with a really interesting hotel that they've built where every single thing is almost like a test. But rather than doing elaborate market research, you quickly do a thumbs up or a thumbs down, just like you would do on, a social media site, whether or not you like that lamp, or you like where that plug is, or you like that service that they've just brought to you, and they can gather information very quickly. And the ones that obviously have resonance, then they roll out more quickly. So just a much more dynamic way of being able to test things, constrain risk, roll things out, get feedback. Another phenomenal example was Microsoft. When their new CEO came in, he did a giant culture shift that started with a one-week hackathon, where every single employee in the company around the world was asked to spend 48 hours coming up with some sort of solution to something. And it could have been a technology solution, or it could be an HR solution, it could be an accounting solution. But part of it was to dislodge the sludge that sat inside a company where everyone just complained a lot about how slow Microsoft was, how out of touch Microsoft was, and how they are. No one listened to my great idea. And it's like, cool, you got a great idea? Now's the time. And by the way, it's not just for the people who have an innovation title or sit in a certain suite in the company. Everyone is responsible for growth and innovation. So whether you're an admin, or whether or not you're part of technical support, or whether you're an accountant, or whether or not you're a web builder, everyone was part of this. And they continued it now for 2 or 3 years. It's turned into a thing called the garage that you can go to, and you can see some of the things that are coming through that are being kind of beta tested inside the organization or outside the organization with various constraints. Sometimes only teachers can play with it. Sometimes only certain communities can play with it, but they make that stuff all very open. Click on any of these products behind it. So they're also really showing that there was an interesting team that was pulled together and formed. Oops, my slide. So I will just say, when we start to think about how we do it, just be really aware of what the hurdles are, right? So yes, sometimes there's a lack of awareness. Do you know about AI, right? Sometimes it's about limited capacity. How can I possibly learn more? Sometimes I just feel like, okay, I just don't know my mobile strategy skills, my social media skills. I talked to an eBay seller who knows that she wants to go into social media, but she doesn't really know how to do it, right? She's trying to figure out the right resources. So here are the two that I would think, again, as executives who are listening to this, it's really important to pay attention to. Unaligned incentives. We tell people we want them to act one way, but inside the organization, we still reward the other. It's what happened at Wells Fargo. Giant disconnect between what we said we wanted and what we really incentivized, either financially or socially inside an organization, and lack of incongruent or lack of congruent infrastructure. We want people to be, collaborative. We want people to be innovative, but we put them in really old, offices with really bad technology, right? That doesn't work. So are we really building structures and culture that are aligned? And the last thing I will just say is a plea for also compassion and kindness to ourselves, right? Recognize that we're going through a big moment of shift. Know that we need to also take really good care of ourselves. And this whole movement toward mindfulness or meditation, or however you want to talk about this idea of being able to kind of just like get quiet and get a little more zen, get some quiet time to think in your day, and just calm everything down, is becoming hugely important. This was a Harvard Business Review story that talked about it. But this is not just happening at Google or at Pinterest, right? This is happening at companies like Chili's, who took all of their regional area managers and built that into some of the gatherings that we had done with them. And this was not on our initiative. This was actually on the COO's initiative. You see it happening at Shell under the guise of innovation and capacity building. You see it at TIAA, who are building it into a very elaborate training program they're doing now for senior execs and for juniors. So recognizing, again, we need to take care of ourselves as we move through this and take care of each other is really important. So my last, in the last 2 minutes, I will just say that for us, playing big is not about growing at scale. It's not about replicating success. It's not about being producers. It is about being navigators who bravely walk into a future with these kinds of values, right? We are committed to creating value. We're creating to open up what it is that we know and how we want to share it and how we want to collaborate with others, and don't think that we're always the smartest people in the room. And again, we invest in building networks, and alliances with each other and with all kinds of interesting technology partners, service provider partners. There's this whole idea about co-opetition in the world of banking right now. We're having this whole conversation about How does the first, Bank of Fargo and the second Bank of Fargo be able to build a more resilient network of community banks to be able to push away some of the really large, huge mega banks that are sucking up all the resources in their communities. So it's about being brave, right? And it is, again, about showing compassion for yourself, for your coworkers and your teams, and for society. I would argue, again, being able to understand that people are all going through this. I sat with a grocery retailer recently at a GMDC event who is stressed out, man, right? So much is being demanded of him 24/7. These eBay sellers are literally competing with sellers around the world. There's a lot coming at us. How do we hold each other well? And how do we kind of, give people a break when they've had a tough day, or make it somehow better for them when they do? So I think that's it. Hopefully I didn't go too fast, but that is, part of my view of the future. So questions?
Nancy, thanks so much. And again, for partnering not only with the Education Leadership Council, but we know you'll be hosting several of our retail immersion events with Retail Tomorrow, and actually on our advisor council for that as well. So it's great to have your voice, not only on this InfoCast, but deep within our association, and really on top for our members as well. So we appreciate your time today. And I do have a few questions.
Again, I'm a strategic futurist, right? I want to be able to take the future. I want to make it actionable. I want to build these steps. So the fact that you guys are so open to that conversation and building Retail Tomorrow and building these immersions and, making the new seem normal so we can actually build really meaningful solutions on top of them is critical. I love being a part of it.
I have a question. Shelley is asking, will a slide deck be available? Shelley, if you can email me at markm@gmdc.org.
Actually, you know what, Mark? I don't make the slide deck available, Mark. I don't want the slide deck to be available because the information shifts in so much, but it's part of embedded in this webcast, right?
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry. I'm talking open.
Just, if people do have unique requests like that, please come through me, and I'll work with Nancy on this. But
or if there's a key slide that you need or a key piece that you need, we'll try and do. There's actually a little booklet that I created. It's a digital booklet on the big shift, just those 9 shifts. Good. It's probably 4 or 5 years old, but that one I'm happy to give away because it starts to at least give us the cultural side. It's just stuff that I feel like when you look at stats or you look at things out of context with a slide deck like this, the stuff's changing so fast. It's part of the story as opposed to an isolated piece of information, right? I'm thinking about this holistically. So that's why.
And that's a great point. But I do want our viewers to know that they can come back and watch this as well in our archive. So although you can't download this, to get the full context that Nancy's talking about is that you can actually share this link. You can tweet it, put it on Facebook. It's easily shareable. By the end of the day, we'll actually have this recorded and up on our website. So please come back, look at our archive tab on gmbcconnect.org. And all these viewers, as well as viewers who may have missed this, will certainly be able to take a look at this one more time. I think the one burning question for me, Nancy, comes through this. What have you witnessed as far as some of the biggest hurdles of change, not only in the industry, but even within organizations?
I mean, I go back to that slide that I went through really quickly toward the end. I really think it's like we make it seem as though people aren't innovative enough and that we need to do all kinds of, elaborate training, or we need to build culture that allows it to be safe to take risks. All those things are important. But I will say, again, I've walked into organizations in which they preach one thing and then the infrastructure or the incentives or the demands that are put on people are not congruent with their ability to do that. And I see people get really stressed out about it. So one of the things that my work has really shifted to right now is how do we hold each other well in this future that we're moving into, right? How do we build compassionate training? Like if you look at things like AT&T is building a really, I think, thoughtful, proactive, compassionate approach to training, which is they've got 280,000 employees. Their business model has completely shifted from delivering one thing to delivering something completely different in like 10 or 15 years, right? They probably will only need 125,000 of those employees. But instead of just firing everybody and rehiring 125 and whatever the tech skills are that they need, they're doing a very comprehensive training strategic program that they've developed in concert with Georgia Tech, with Udacity, with a social contract with workers that they have to put in a certain amount of time, or employees to put in a certain amount of time. The idea being that even if they don't stay with AT&T in the next 5 years, they will have skills that make them more marketable and make them ready to take on this future. It gives me chills when I think about it. It's just such a thoughtful way of being able to help prepare people for the future. So it's those kinds of things that I, am drawn to and I'm excited about.
It reminds me of Richard Branson says, he says, to train people well enough that they can leave, but well enough that they don't want to leave.
Right. So the environment is still stimulating enough and there's a role for them, right? But if you look at the numbers, I don't have the stat right in front of me, but like, again, market value of companies, whatever it was 25 or 30 years ago, and the number of employees that were part of them, the equal market cap now for these digital companies that have not even a third less company. I mean, they have like a 10th less of the employees. There are a whole bunch of people that need to figure out how to reskill or upskill or shift. If you think about universal basic income, what will that mean in terms of our societal value that we place on paid work by others, as opposed to just work that we do because we love doing it? I do TEDx because I just love doing it. I'm on the board of GMGC because I want to be part of this,
Sure.
this shift. I don't get paid for those things. So there's a whole bunch of recalibration that's going to happen. And I think the companies that can get ahead of that and be part of that and be stewards for that and provide scaffolding for that are really valuable.
What are some of the future forward opportunities that you see for the industry, Nancy?
I mean, I think that there's this whole really interesting thing, right? Because you're going to have AI on one end, artificial intelligence, that's going to do a whole bunch of data mining and do a whole bunch of stuff that's going to make things incredibly relevant for me. It's still super frustrating for me to go to a website and look for a doorknob. And I know specifically that I want a modern one out of a certain material, and I've got to go through 5 billion freaking doorknobs to get to the 20 out of that whole site that I might want. The good news is there's lots of choice. The bad news is I'm overwhelmed by it. The buying experience is gross, and I don't feel like you know me, right? So the great news is that technology is going to come and make a lot of that stuff more relevant, simpler, and easier to find exactly what I want. And or I can go find an artisan or a 3D printer that I can have it printed exactly the way that I want. I can have design custom made just for me. So I do think that there's a whole digital world that's going to be phenomenal. The question is then what happens in the brick and mortar world? We are still humans. We still want to get out. We want to do things. And what we see is things right now driven to highly experiential, right? So whether it's the Warby Parker store that's super, playful, or whether it's one of the stores that we saw in Palo Alto, Draeger's, that has this incredible, like, you walk into that store, you feel like you're in a European market, and it's got a restaurant, and it's got, a floral display, but it also has things that are beautifully curated that show me that it's not just about putting a bunch of different things for Easter on shelves. It's building a beautiful Easter table and showing me what that can look like and how I can have that in my life too. It's bringing Crate and Barrel meets West Elm to my, grocery store. So, and we've been talking about that to retailers for a long time. Again, I'm telling you, the community table at a casual dining restaurant is not a crazy, wacky thing to do. It is about being able to recognize that I've got that real estate and I can add tremendous value to people's lives by doing something that creates more value for them.
Shelley's
really be thinking through how do I use.
Shelley's come back with one more question. I'm sorry, Nancy. Says, we're a disruptive design company trying to bridge the gap of retailers thinking in old ways. Any tips on moving these people to be more courageous by adding new assortments when they're under so much pressure in the changing world?
I think I lost you for 1 second. What was the beginning of that question?
We're a disruptive design company trying to bridge the gap with retailers who think in old ways.
Oh, I know. I feel your pain, honey. I know. It's part of why we created our blog called Cultural Acupuncture. It was about trying to make the new seem normal, because here's the issue, right? This is why I do these webcasts. If my clients or my partners believe the world is flat and I believe the world is round, we will never get anywhere, right? So how do I make the future seem less, not even like scary, but just relevant, like tangible, right? So when we went to various people, we said we should build a community table, or we should use this empty building for an incubator, or we should do whatever. They thought we were crazy, and we're not. So my hang in there, I guess, and really try and figure out again how to compassionately educate people and open up their aperture and find the people who are champions inside. Every organization's got those champions, right? Give them some voice, give them some airtime, give them a chance to evangelize to others. How possible this is. So I don't have a great answer, but people who don't will be disrupted by somebody who does. So
Dan is asking, where can he find more information about today's presentation? Should he engage with you and reach out to you directly, Nancy, or myself?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my website is playbiginc.com. My address is right there. It's Nancy at PlayBigInc. So sure. There are some interesting talks on the one from South by Southwest on the future of intelligence is on the website. It's kind of a cool hour to spend thinking about this crazy future. There are a couple other things on the future of work, but and specifically around this work, I would love to talk to anyone. Great.
Well, Nancy, I'm looking at our clock and we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. But thanks for your time today. We appreciate the disruptive conversation that you started for many of the viewers that are here, and some viewers are still in the midst of it trying to figure it out. So thanks for education today.
Sure. And if you ever want to build a community inside GMGC to have these conversations, Mark, that could be a cool thing.
Will do. Thanks, Nancy.
Bye,
So
guys.
back to our viewers, if this is the first time you're experiencing a GMBC Infocast, I'd like to make sure that you're aware that this session and all previous Infocasts can be viewed in the archive tab on gmbcconnect.org. We mentioned that a little bit earlier as one of our first questions. I'd also like to encourage you, if you're not a member, to get involved with GMBC and become one. Today's Infocast is a small sample of what members have access to. GMBC is a business ecosystem that helps you connect, collaborate, create, and enable commerce in both the general merchandise and health, beauty, wellness industry. For more information, contact me at markm@gmbc.org. I'd love to help you find opportunities to stay and get connected. Thanks for joining us today. We hope the rest of your day is as productive as this Infocast has been. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.